Being alone by yourself can sometimes seem like a daunting thing. And some people, I think, are better at being by themselves, being alone than others. I would say I tend to be on the more introverted side. And I think generally I do pretty well at being by myself. But there's definitely times where just like the weight of being alone, like the loneliness and the isolation just weighs down. So it can be a difficult thing to be by ourselves. So just want to spend some time today talking about like how to do it well, because there's definitely a way to spend time by ourselves and learn how to be by ourselves well. And there's definitely some value to it when we can learn how to do it and to avoid the negative effects that come with feelings of impending loneliness and isolation. So learning to avoid that. First of all, before we talk about like how to be by yourself well, it is important to acknowledge that it is not a good thing to spend too much time by yourself, because it is not good for man to be alone. We as human beings are created for communion, relationship with other people. From the beginning, in the book of Genesis, it says when God created Adam, he said, it is not good for man to be alone. And so he creates Eve. We are made for a relationship with other people. So I think it is much easier for us to get discouraged and to feel the weight of loneliness when we're not around other people. And sometimes it feels like there's despair that's hard to be with people. So like how can the first step I think is, if we feel extra alone, is to make active steps towards spending time with more people. So here's what I would usually suggest to people is I would make like 3 concentric circles, kind of like the Target logo. So you have an inner circle and then a middle circle and then an outer circle. And then I'm going to call these kind of your tiers of engagement or your tiers of community. So you're going to have in that inner circle, in the middle circle, I would write in there all of your closest best friends. I would say this is probably maximum like 4 or 5 people. People that like know just the deep things about you, that like anytime, anywhere, you could hit them up and spend time with them, or you'd reach out to them and tell them about anything that goes on to you. The first people that you're reaching out to. This is like your inner circle, and again, it's probably not more than 4 or 5 people. In the second circle, I would write down any people who you consider friends, but that maybe aren't like close friends, but definitely aren't just acquaintances. People like you know well, you see on a fairly regular basis, or at least you talk to on a sort of regular basis, that you like know a fair amount about each other. But again, you wouldn't say are like inner circle, but are good friends. That's tier 2. And then in tier 3 is any other people you can think of who are like acquaintances that like you see on a semi-regular basis, and maybe you don't spend a lot of time together outside that intentionally, and maybe you know a little bit about each other, but not super deeply, but at least you spend enough time around each other that you would say that you're like acquaintances that come to mind. Outside of that is every other stranger that could exist in the world. But I would spend some time writing down names, specific names in each of those circles. And then what I would do is I would look at the people in the inner circle and try to figure out how much time do you spend with them? And do you feel like you get to spend enough time with them? And if not, we'll acknowledge that. And if you feel like you do get to spend enough time with the people in the inner circle and you still feel kind of alone, then I would go out to the second circle and figure out who in tier 2, and especially if you like don't have many people in tier 1, to think of who the people are in tier 2 that you could move from tier 2 down into tier 1. Like, who are the people, if you don't, like, I don't really have that many, like, super deep, close friendships. And it would be a good thing to develop some. So who's in tier 2, you're like, you know what? I think this person could be someone who's running the race with me. This could be a close, dear friend of mine, and maybe just take some intentionality. So think through some of those people of, like, who could I spend more time with in tier 2? And maybe even you go out to tier 3 and think of, like, you know what? He seems like a cool guy. Maybe it would be a good thing for me to get to know him more, and maybe he could be a brother. But the part of this that's really important is the intentionality. Like, no matter where people are in the circle, relationships require intentionality. So if you're like, man, I feel like I never get to see people or hang out with people, maybe take the initiative. Like, this is what it requires sometimes. And especially if we're talking about like you know what, I don't know if I have enough close friends and I'm like trying to move people from tier 3 to tier 2 or tier 2 to tier 1. Often what that looks like is kind of like friend dating, where you like say, you know what, I'm I'm going to be intentional. I'm going to intentionally pursue this person and try to be a closer friend with them. And you go on, you like spend a few like friend dates with them and do a few things together. And you try to get a sense of like, is this someone who could be a close friend? Is this someone who could move more towards the center or not? And if not, it's totally fine because they're, just the way that dating works, like it just dates and then, you don't DTR until a certain point, but like just moving someone closer and closer to the middle of the circle and then just like being intentional with those people. And hopefully writing out these names in these circles helps you to realize that there are people for you that you could spend time with. So if you feel super alone, then just to be able to acknowledge like, okay, yeah, no, I do have people and maybe I just need to be more intentional with them. And lastly, if you don't have people, if you can't think of people to write down in those circles, you feel like, you know what, I've exhausted this list and I don't have close friends and I don't know who to reach out to, then the intentionality has to come from finding small communities, local communities, whether it's at your church, or whether it's at the gym, or whether you like go on social media and find like, based on your interests, some like small groups of young adults or whatever your age demographic is, people who are doing community things and events. And then go do them. You just got to get out of your comfort zone a little bit. I know as an introvert, it's a difficult thing. But if you're like, I am alone, then what it requires is getting out of our comfort zone and going to be with people and some real intentionality towards doing that. So that's the first step. If you find yourself like too alone, that's probably not a good thing. So to spend some time to like move towards a nice intermediate spot where it's not like I'm crazy alone, but also not where I'm spending way too much time with people. Because I think there is actually some real value in spending some alone time. There's a lot of things we can learn about ourselves, and there's a lot of just like being by ourselves is inevitable. So if you spend all your time with people, then it probably will be harder to be by yourself because you don't know how to be by yourself because you always lean on other people. So try to find the middle ground. But then when the inevitable time comes that you are by yourself, how do we do this well? The trap that we can fall into that causes alone time to become a deteriorating thing for us is not the fact that we are alone, but the thoughts that come up when we are alone, when we are by ourselves. Because again, if you're going to be by yourself at some point, it's inevitable and you just can't spend all your time with other people. And I would say you probably shouldn't just spend all your time with other people. Then the thing that makes being alone a like hard thing is the thoughts and the lies that we begin to hear and believe when we are alone. So this is a trap. This is what happens. This is what makes like loneliness and isolation a heavy and deteriorating thing, is when I am by myself and the thought that comes to my mind is, I'm alone and that means blank about me. And that blank is filled in with some kind of lie that we begin to believe about ourselves when we are alone. And then it just like swirls around in our mind. I'll give you some examples. And some of these are just like personal examples of like, I'm alone and that means no one likes me. And that means no one wants to hang out with me. That means I'm no fun. That means I don't belong. That means I'm too different for anyone else to be my friend. That means, I don't know, you could add things. I have a few things I wrote down here. That means I'll always be alone. Maybe you got other things that you would add to that list, but it's so important. First step is this kind of reactive step in learning how to be by ourselves, is to be able to acknowledge and to name the lies that come to mind when we are by ourselves. That if the reality is that, okay, when I'm by myself, I have a hard time being by myself because shame comes, because the lie comes to my head that I'm by myself, and that means that I am no good and no fun and no one wants to be with me. Like, I know other people are doing stuff and I didn't get invited, so that means I'm no good. Those are the things that we just need to cast out because they cause shame. We have no time for shame. Shame has no place in a good life. So like the necessity here is to be able to think through, okay, what when I am by myself are the negative thoughts that come to mind? So like maybe you just have to catch yourself doing this when you're by yourself next, but to be able to name them, acknowledge them and name them so that when they come up, we can cast them out and renounce them. Like this is It's like the thing that we probably just need to actually do. When the thought comes to mind of, okay, I'm by myself, and that means that I'm no good and no one wants to be with me, and now I feel shame. What needs to happen right there in that moment is when you say, no, that's a lie. That's not true. And I'm casting that one out. I'm not believing that one. It's that kind of reactive measure that is like a necessary first step to be able to name the lies, cast the lies out. The proactive measure then finally on how to be by ourselves well is some intentionality to figure out when I'm by myself, or just like in general, what do I like to do? And I made a video a few weeks back. It's called like church people are boring and need more hobbies or something like that. And maybe that's a good place to start in thinking about this, but think through like, what do you like to do? If you have a hard time being by yourself, maybe it's because you don't know what to do when you're by yourself. So maybe to actually develop some hobbies and interests and things of like, when I'm by myself, I know what to do. I like know how to spend my time. I know how to enjoy being by myself because when I'm by myself, I do this thing or that thing. And maybe it's a mix of things that are like restful and leisurely, things that are like, I'm just doing it for the sake of doing it because I enjoy it. Those are good things to have in our life. We like kind of need leisure is a good, but I would maybe also say some things to add to that list that are like purposeful, that are maybe goal oriented, that get you excited, that just doesn't feel like you're kind of wasting your time all the time when you're by yourself, but like things that you can enjoy and get excited about with some kind of purpose. Think through what those things are, what you like to do. Figure out what you like to do and plan to do it, like in advance, so that the alone time doesn't catch you off guard and then you don't know what to do because you didn't plan out the time. I would actually, especially if you're like not good at this, to actually train being alone. And what I mean by that is to put in your schedule some me time for, I don't know, carve out like an hour or 2 or 3 on a random day. Plan what you're going to do specifically during that time, and then go enjoy yourself and do it. That is like training how to be good at being by yourself. So those are my thoughts. I say again, if you're spending too much time by yourself, it's maybe not totally a good thing. And I would say we do need to be with people. So think through who we can be with and how to be intentional about reaching out to them. But also there's definitely some value in not just spending all your time with people and being by yourself, and learning how to be by yourself and how to react when the lies and the shame come that deteriorate our alone time, and how to cast those out, and then how to plan proactively, not just react, but proact and plan, be intentional, figuring out what you like to do and plan to do it. It'll help us to grow in being by ourselves because, again, it's an inevitable thing that we're all going to have to do, and life is so much better when we know how to do it well.